Farm so hard, the employees wanna find me, and then wanna hire me. What's 100K to a guy like me? Could you please remind me? Farm so hard, this ain't easy. Working late nights, you best believe me. My grades can only go A's. Never wanna see another B unless I'm Jay-Z. Farm so hard, let's get paid.
This is Morgan Greer.
This is Michaela Hayes, and you're listening to another episode of the Farm So Hard Ambulatory Care Podcast.
What's up, fam? Welcome to another episode of the Farm So Hard Ambulatory Care Podcast. Today, we are going to dive into controversial GLP-1 topics. I think you're going to really like this episode. But before we get started, I want to dive into some updates, some life updates. Morgan, what has been your life update for this week?
The past couple of weeks have been crazy for me. I've just been like overwhelmed with like all this stuff going on in my life. But I did make my first payment on Betty the Bronco. She officially, I put money down on her, of course, when I bought her, but the first big payment. But before I can make that first payment, though, I may or may not have gotten pulled over for speeding. Yeah. What was really irritating about that interaction, though, especially as a woman, especially driving like a bigger SUV truck, if you will, was the cop, when he came up to the window, he was like, "Oh, is this your husband's truck?" And I was like, "No,
oh my gosh,
no, it's not." And he's like, "Oh, so it's in your name?" And I was like, "Yeah, because I paid the bill." And first of all, I ain't even got a prospect for a husband. Let's just put that out there. So the whole husband thing is a no. So that was just like really irritating. But yeah, so Betty the Bronco might be getting a little more expensive in the near future. What's been going on with you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad you got to like slap back at him and be like, "Listen, this is my Betty the Bronco and I'm taking her for a cruise." I know. That's terrible.
Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, but this has been a big week for me. I started a new position and I'm working on a kidney transplant team in the inpatient and outpatient setting with an MUSC affiliated hospital. So I'm really excited about that and excited to bring all the content about transplant to you guys and talk more about it. And that kind of aligns with our whole podcast. So it really worked out well.
Yeah, kidney transplant's a really cool area. I worked a lot in kidney transplant last year. It's just really cool because kidney is one of the only organs where you can have like live donors, of course. And so I have a patient where her daughter-in-law donated her kidney to her, and that's like a really special thing to see. It gets a little sad sometimes when you see like pediatric donors, but then obviously just seeing that this gives people another chance at life. I know you'll also see like SPKs, like dual pancreas and kidney transplants for people with like diabetes type 1 later in life. So it's a really cool area for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's going to be the hardest part is like losing patients, just because, you know, we get in the AmCare world, I think we just get so attached because we have those longitudinal relationships, and it's going to be just super hard, but I'm excited for it and can't wait to share all the deets with you guys. But let's like walk into our first topic. So we're going to start with the role of social media and its impact on patient care. So social media is pretty much blown up as a powerful force in shaping the perceptions and behaviors, including those related to the availability and just what GLP-1 medications are. And this is in the space of, I personally have seen more obesity rather than diabetes, but I have seen diabetes as well. But even like outside of social media, like family, friends, just people in general that you come across, and then they find out you're in the healthcare space and they're like, "Oh, I've heard about GLP-1s, like tell me about them, what do you think?" Or hearing about them from their friends taking them for weight loss or diabetes, and then everybody's excited. But platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, these forums have really blown up with patients, healthcare professionals, and advocacy groups sharing their experiences and information and their opinions. And it really has influenced, even from a celebrity space, like Elon Musk and the Kardashians talking about and magnifying the spotlight of weight loss medications, including GLP-1s. And that's why it's really important for, I think, healthcare people to be in the space and be able to address misinformation that might be propagated through social media and really guide patients and friends and family through like evidence-based treatment and the true factual information from everything. But kind of walk me through your perspective on this and some important topics that you think relate to social media and the impact on the GLP-1 space.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I feel like I can't open up TikTok a single day without seeing something about GLP-1s on my For You page, which again, For You page is based on my preferences and things that I already watched. So maybe it's my own fault. I don't know. But I think the biggest thing, and I saw somebody mention this on social media once, and it's really stuck with me because I get typically so frustrated when I watch things on social media that are just blatantly incorrect. And I think this is great advice, whether you're in healthcare or not, is when you see a piece of information on social media, you have to ask yourself the question, or a couple of questions really, is what is that person's training or their credentials? Because I think that's really important for patients to recognize and absorb is, who is the person feeding you this information, especially in the rise of people on social media who maybe are like lifestyle coaches, fitness coaches. There's like fertility coaches, people who maybe claim to have some sort of like certification, but there wasn't a lot of like education or training behind that credential that they're claiming to have. So is the person giving you this advice a physician, a PA, an MP, a pharmacist, a nurse, somebody who actually has some legitimate credentials? And, because obviously when somebody walks into a clinic, you assume everybody there obviously has some type of training, license, credentialing, and that's why anything you get in that clinic, information or otherwise, you're trusting because you trust that these people have had the training to be where they are. You don't necessarily get that on social media. And so I really encourage anybody who's receiving information to kind of take that in. But even beyond that, I think we've unfortunately had some other cases on social media where we have people who do have credentialing that maybe talk outside of their scope of practice. And so we've seen a lot of people encourage that as well, to pay attention to, if they're an MD, PA, NP, whatever, what is their scope of practice? Where do they practice? So a lot of people will get on TikTok and they'll say, hey, I am an OBGYN nurse or an OBGYN physician. I will only talk about OBGYN topics. Like I'm not going to go off and start talking about neurology or your seizures or giving you advice for that, because that's not my scope of practice. Of course, probably in the time frame of your training, you had some exposure to those topics, but that's not your expertise. That's not your content. And so I think just taking all of those things into consideration when you're looking at any advice that you get online is like the first big thing, especially when we talk about kind of the promotion of these products on the internet.
Yeah, I love that. Just in my clinic today, there was, I think either providers are pro GLP-1s or they're like not for GLP-1s. And there's a provider that I've worked with in the past who's like so pro GLP-1s. And, some patients, it might not be the best option for if they're already having GI issues. And then you throw on a GLP-1, that's going to cause like more GI issues. And there might be better alternatives out there, or like the supply chain issue. I mean, just in the last month, I've seen so many issues where people can't get it through their insurance. And then when they find a pharmacy that does have it, it's like $800 for the patient because it's not through their preferred formulary or whatever their insurance wants. So it's just like, it's putting the healthcare providers in a really tough space as well, just trying to find coverage and supply for these medications. And I think social media is a big proponent of leading to these issues.
Yeah, I think a lot of healthcare professionals, myself included, have a little bit of burnout with GLP-1s because I cannot go to work a single day without being asked 20 different times about something involving a GLP-1, whether it's coverage, whether it's like which one is the best one. Oh, this one's out of stock. So do I need to transition? Do I go down on the dose? What do I do? And so I feel like it's 80% of my job at this point. And I think these are great medications for their indications, whether it be for obesity or for diabetes. It's just kind of really become a large part of practice. So it gives a little bit of a burnout. And so I think a lot of that burnout comes from the other kind of side of social media pushing the body image side of things, and maybe the toxic part that it can play in the body image kind of realm of using a GLP-1 because we know that these are great tools for people with chronic obesity. And the BMI indications are typically somebody that is greater than or equal to 30 or greater than or equal to 27 with at least like one chronic condition like hypertension, hyperlipidemia, etc., that puts them at risk for other long-term complications. And so I don't want to hate on GLP-1s for that use because they're absolutely life-saving for a lot of people. But I think there also is this, especially for women, like negative stigma online when it comes to body image. And you see a lot of people seeking out maybe GLP-1s that don't meet the indication when it comes to like their weight or their BMI, but they feel like, oh, the celebrities are on it. Oh, this person I see is on it. And they feel like, oh, I could use it to lose like 10 pounds. And that's not really their designed indication. And we have evidence to say, you know, when you come off of these medications, you will gain the weight back. And so again, these are great solutions for people with chronic obesity. So these are people dedicating themselves to saying, hey, I'm probably going to have to stay on this for a majority of my life if I want to continue with this weight loss journey.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a big thing. Like social media is so, I mean, I see it in myself when I look up TikTok or Instagram. You're seeing the absolute most picturesque version of this person's life and even celebrities, and it's hard not to compare and think like, oh, how are they must be so like dedicated to their fitness or their, you know, health and all these things. In reality, everything is like a season. You know, you're in a season of you're doing well, you're on track, and you're in a season of maybe not on track, and just like not looking for the quick fix, because it's truly not a quick fix. When you look at the evidence, when you come off of it, you gain that weight back, just like you said. But then you have like so many people talking about it. And just like, I think we had talked about it earlier, you'd seen an Oprah special on it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I mean, how can patients not fall prey to that?
Right. So like you've probably seen in social media somewhere, there's like an Oprah special that she did talking about GLP-1 specifically for the indications of weight loss. And so I watched it myself a couple of days ago, and it was very interesting because in typical Oprah special form, a lot of the content was revolving around like personal testimonies, which obviously are going to elicit the emotion to make you more engulfed in the story and maybe the power of GLP-1s in these particular people's lives. But it was also interesting because they brought on like 2 obesity specialists, like physicians who practice in this area. And they briefly went over the like mechanism of GLP-1s. But what I was kind of disappointed in, because the intro specifically alluded to this, they didn't really cover a whole lot on the side effects. They didn't really talk about it a lot, which was disappointing because I think that is a fair part of the discussion to be had, especially with all the buzz online that goes on with GLP-1s, and then also all the buzz online with GLP-1s that goes on about maybe potential side effects, and that deters maybe people who really could benefit from it from taking it because they're getting scared online with things that are either very rare or maybe not even true at all. And so it was interesting. They also had both of the reps from the drug manufacturers, so Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, and they sat directly next to each other during the show, and they took questions from the audience. And so they actually mentioned very briefly the drug that we talked about in our like mini journal club last time, the retatrutide, the triple agonist that is currently in clinical trials. So briefly mentioned that, and then, you know, that kind of sent me on my spiral of like, oh no, now people are going to know about this and they're going to start asking about this, and it's not even out yet. I'm like, oh gosh. But it's just another forum for this to kind of be publicized. And it was interesting to hear patients ask questions in the audience because they're very similar to questions that we get all the time. But it really highlighted maybe some of the things and controversies that we'll talk about a little bit later with like compounding versions of this product. What were those physician, like obesity specialist opinions on those things? And yeah, it's a very interesting thing. So I would recommend you watch it just for, you know, some context on, you know, what's being put out there in the media, but definitely an interesting watch for sure.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard stories from your patients or even friends or people that you meet. Like I've heard stories of people where their husband has type 2 diabetes, and then they he gets on a GLP-1, then he loses all this weight. And the wife's like, oh, I want a GLP-1. And then I hear stories like, oh, she started taking half of his pen, and then he, was taking the other half. And I'm like, that is, that's definitely not kosher, and, something that we need to make sure we.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, because I think I talked to you maybe a couple weeks ago about like an instance that I saw on social media of this girl couldn't have been a day over 16. And again, we're talking about like this whole body image issue, especially with young girls that are already predisposed to all the things of social media that makes them already body conscious potentially at that age. And she basically said, oh, my mom takes Ozempic for her diabetes. And so I went and stole her Ozempic and I took it. And then what became a problem with that was like, obviously the 16-year-old girl didn't know that like, oh, you need to start at a low dose and like be titrated up. And so she took her mom's Ozempic, which happened to be a 2 milligram Ozempic, the highest dose possible. So she ended up in the ER with like nausea, vomiting, like abdominal pain, like all of these horrible symptoms in a very like traumatic event, because she didn't know that like, obviously this was the highest dose, but that really could have caused a very serious life-threatening issue, because she just wanted to take her mom's Ozempic to maybe be skinnier or maybe be cool at school and tell her friends like, oh, I took my mom's Ozempic. Like, these are kind of the issues that social media is like possibly creating, especially in young girls. Like, I remember myself at 16 thinking I was like the biggest person alive, but now I look back pictures of me at like 16, I'm like, oh, what were you talking about? Like, this is so silly. But I think that's going to continue to maybe be an issue when we think about, like, even to your point, like other family members, other adults, taking other people's medication, which we know is not allowed or recommended. So how much of that are we going to continue to see in the future?
Yeah, definitely. And like, I heard an endocrinologist talking about Ozempic or just GLP-1s in general. And this kind of aligns with what I hear from patients who are taking GLP-1s for obesity. A lot of times they jokingly laugh and they're just like, I call it fasting because I'm just not hungry, and I don't eat basically all day, or I'll eat like a tiny, tiny little meal or one little thing. And it just, that's how it mechanistically works, right? Acting on all those different mechanisms to make you feel satiated and, not be hungry. But then I heard an endocrinologist talking about it, and they were saying that the evidence that they kind of see is that patients have the same type of indications as someone when they lose the weight as someone who was starving themselves. So it's kind of, going hand in hand. If you're not ingesting or taking in the proper nutrients, it's really not beneficial for you. If you don't learn healthy habits alongside of doing this medication, like the indication even says, along with diet and exercise, if you're not implementing these healthy habits alongside of this medication, it's really not doing you as much benefit as it is potentially harming you, and not going to help you in the long run. If you can't get the supply of the GLP-1, or you want to get off the GLP-1, those are just some factors to think about that I think patients are just not aware of.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see, like, and I'm kind of surprised by this in a way, but will we eventually get some kind of contraindication, like post-market, for GLP-1s for like those with eating disorder histories? Because that's currently not something, I mean, that's a logical thing to probably think about in your brain as somebody who's involved in like the prescribing of this, but it's not in black and white, like in the information pamphlet. And so I think there's a part of this between social media and then again, how the drug works, that is this creating an opportunity for eating disorders, disordered eating habits, and like you said, you need to kind of form those good lifestyle habits in addition to, which is always recommended with any drug therapy. But at the same time, like, this could be like a breeding ground for something like that to start occurring in patients, especially when we talk about like younger patients who are using it for the obesity indication. So I'll be interested to see if that ever happens.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So our next controversy that we're going to talk about is one of my favorite ones, which is why I'm going to let Michaela take the lead, because she's going to say all of these things way more elegantly than I will ever be able to, because I get heated when I talk about this particular controversy. So Michaela, tell us about compounding of GLP-1s on the market, and what does that have to do with the impact of people using it, social media, all the things that we've talked about?
Yeah. So first, I just want to let the audience know, the role of compounding pharmacies in this type of situation. So compounding pharmacies basically customize or provide customized medications to help meet specific medication needs. And there's definitely a time and a place for them. I remember going on rotations and being a part of compounding pharmacies. It was really cool. Not my jam. I really didn't like lab stresses me out, especially like
every time.
Yeah, like the amounts of things. I just didn't feel like it was, if I felt like something was not perfect, then I felt like the whole thing was ruined, and I just did
Do you
not.
still have any of the stuff that you made?
Maybe. Probably not.
I have some chapsticks and maybe a suppository that I made.
I like it.
Moving on.
Yeah, that was not a fun time in pharmacy. That was our first year in pharmacy school, and just like,
yeah.
And I remember like even lab in undergrad, that was when I learned, I got stressed out about the specifics of how perfect and not perfect it was. And I was like, this is just not for me. My sister works in chemistry and I don't know how she does it. So good on her. But anyway, their primary function is to prepare medications that are not commercially available or to modify the existing formulations to suit individual patient requirements. And compounded drugs are considered off-label. So they are not approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. So oversight of compounding pharmacies and in-clinic compounding varies state to state. And although the FDA has issued some guidance for compounding pharmacies and regulates like through 503B and through 503B pharmacies, but as of January 10th of this year, the FDA released a statement, and they were talking about medications containing semaglutide, right, which is Ozempic or Wegovy, marketed for type 2 diabetes or weight loss. And this statement acknowledged that when there is a drug shortage, compounders are able to prepare compounded versions of a drug that might meet certain requirements by the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. But as of May 2023, Ozempic and Wegovy have been listed on the FDA's drug shortage list. But overall concerns that the FDA has addressed about compounding semaglutide includes receiving adverse event reports after patients use compounded semaglutide. And the FDA continues to advise against using compounded drugs if the FDA approved version is available, or if the agency, because the agency doesn't review the compounded versions, right? So you don't know the actual safety, efficacy, and quality data associated with the compounded versions of the drug rather than getting it from the manufacturer. The FDA also received reports that in some cases, compounders may be using the salt forms of semaglutide, and that means the semaglutide sodium and semaglutide acetate, and the salt forms are different active ingredients that are used in the FDA approved drugs, which contains the base form of semaglutide. And the agency is not aware of any basis for compounding using the salt forms that would meet the FD&C requirements for types of active ingredients that can be compounded. So they explicitly express to definitely, follow the rules and get it if you can, if it's available through the, pharmacy that is approved to dispense the drug, not necessarily from a compounding pharmacy. And then just be aware of who you're getting it from, because some of these drugs were found, when they reviewed the compounded drugs, they found harmful ingredients or not correct ingredients. Like I saw one case where it was just sugar and alcohol that was in there, and not even any active true ingredients with the drug. So that's just something to definitely be aware of. Or like, okay, yeah, I saw on March 7th of 2024, there was an article posted from Lilly where they found bacteria and high levels of impurities in the products containing compounded versions of tirzepatide. So that was just really concerning.
Yeah, I think my first question when I started seeing this kind of pop up online, or people promoting it, or even like local places, like me and Michaela have talked about, me even in Virginia seeing like local spa clinics talk about, oh, we'll give you Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, whatever. So they said, oh, we'll give you semaglutide and tirzepatide. But when in their promotions, they didn't even spell tirzepatide right, which should be red flag enough that this place is maybe not a reputable place. But my first question when I started seeing this stuff was like, where are they getting it, right? Because if Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are having supply chain issues, right? Like putting out the product. How are all these other random local places, online places, like where are they getting the semaglutide or the tirzepatide? And so, and Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly have both come out and said, we don't sell the semaglutide or tirzepatide to other people. And so there might be another legitimate source of where they're getting it. I'm not exactly sure if these drug manufacturers are the sole producers or owners, but they do have patents, which is why they also have taken legal action against a lot of these different spa clinics or online agencies. So it's just very interesting to me. So then finding out a lot of them are maybe using a salt formulation that's not been, investigated by the FDA. And I think we have to acknowledge the whole role of an FDA approved product, and why that's so important is because of the fact that the FDA's sole responsibility is to go to these manufacturing plants, make sure that there are sterile procedures in place for the product and manufacturing of the actual medications and the product you're receiving as a patient. They're making sure that there's certain sterility things being followed, that the labeling is correct, what we're saying is in it is actually in it. You mentioned a bunch of articles that have come out. There's been additional studies to find out that, what they say on the label is in there as far as like a dosage has been up to 33% more or less than what that's actually on the label. Well, the FDA goes to the manufacturers and makes sure that manufacturers adhere to that, and they test those products to make sure that what they're saying is in the pen is actually in the pen. And so to your point, like the FDA has no governing agency over compounding pharmacies. So it's not under their jurisdiction, if you will, to do that. And nor do they have probably the resources to account for every single online compounding pharmacy or agency that's popping up online. And we don't even know if these are pharmacies with true pharmacists. We have no idea. It's not regulated the same way. And so it's a really risky area to kind of see these products being placed in online. It's the same thing as like you wouldn't recommend your patient go online and buy their oxycodone online either. It's the same thought process. So I think the role of this, right, is to supplement in a situation where we have a lack of supply to people who truly do need it and are truly indicated for it. But at what cost? Because it's getting to the point where this is kind of sketchy. Like, I don't know what's in it. You could say what's in it, but I don't know if I believe you. There's no regulation around it. Like, this is becoming a patient safety issue, and the FDA has received tons of reports on various adverse effects that patients are having. And so there's no really way to know exactly what a patient's getting if they get a compounded product.
Yeah. And I've seen just as a patient or as a person consuming information about, like, in the med spa circle, I've seen where med spas are really into the weight loss space. And I've seen where they, have GLP-1 injections available for their patients. And I've even seen where I don't remember even which one that I was looking at, and I'm pretty sure they were compounding their own. And the physician was touting like his personal weight loss journey with his compounded version that he was using. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that's, a way to get patients to do it. But is that legal? That's what I always come back to as a pharmacist, right, and wanting to like definitely be in the lines of the law is like, is this legal if we can get the versions from the FDA? But they are on the drug shortage list. It's just, right, as a patient, I would want to be on the most safe version of the drug.
Well, and to your point, with like other people promoting it online, it's like the whole weird thing of like, oh, link in my bio for compounded GLP-1, like that alone is just so sketchy to me. And we talked a little bit earlier about the whole thought process of like weaponizing cost in this situation. And so to your point, the FDA has announced you should not use a compounded product if FDA approved version is available. And so for the most part, at least my experience in my clinic and kind of my local supply assessment of the local area here has been most of it, with the exception of like Trulicity 1.5, is pretty regularly in stock when it comes to Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. Like a lot of those supply issues have died down pretty well. So now a lot of the conversation has come to, okay, yeah, it's in stock, but I could get the compounded product for $250 a month compared to like $1,300 a month of the brand name Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro if it's not covered under your insurance. And so are we putting patients at risk by doing something that's not evaluated by the FDA? We don't know its efficacy or safety if they're using one of these like salt formulations that we don't know about purely out of a cost reason. And so their promotion of this product could be, oh, well, yeah, it's basically the same thing, but mine's $250 a month compared to $1,300 a month. Which one do you think a patient's going to choose? But then that comes with consequences sometimes of like a safety issue. And we talked about too, a lot of these compounded products are not in milligrams the way that the branded versions are. So for example, like Mounjaro Zepbound, they come in that one use, click, easy pen. It's the milligrams that it says it is. We know that because the FDA regulates it and all of those good things. But then when you get a compounded product, a lot of times it's in units, which is really weird. So how do you, as somebody producing the GLP-1 compounded version, how do you convert from milligrams to units? How do you explain that to a patient? Because everything that they see online is dosed in milligrams, and then you're telling them an X number of units, and then putting that on the patient to know how to properly draw that up from a vial. It's the same thing of why we use more insulin pens nowadays than the insulin vials, is because there's a lot of medication errors that can sometimes come with having a patient draw up their own amount of units through like an insulin vial or a vial of the GLP-1 that's been compounded. There's a lot of errors. And so I saw another report that said, hey, a patient who was doing this was actually drawing it up incorrectly and giving themselves 10 times the dose that they were supposed to be giving themselves with this compounded GLP-1. And so I think overall, it just poses a lot of concerns when it comes to safety for patients themselves, who is our utmost priority to protect in these situations.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
All right, our third and last section today is going to be the controversies of backorder, supply chain issues. What all do we do in those situations? I think this really has become less of a maybe controversy since the obesity weight loss indications came out, because I think when this first was going on, there was a controversy about like, oh, weight loss patients are using diabetes patient supply because it was indicated for them. Now that we have both indications, that's not as much of a controversy, if you will. But Michaela, what have you kind of been noticing on the terms of like backorder supply chain issues?
Yeah, I think when I really noticed it in full swing was when I was in residency my first year, and that was in 2021, 2022. I staffed in an outpatient pharmacy that was affiliated with, like, tied in the hospital. And it was just such a struggle with GLP-1s. And this was about the time that they were about to release Mounjaro. And I think that, like, in my head, and this could be completely false, but I'm like, they're reallocating all the resources from GLP-1 regular production to Mounjaro production. And then along with the social media celebrities coming out and being like, oh my gosh, Ozempic is the best thing. Like, you should try it. And then you see the weight loss results from people like the Kardashians or Elon Musk. And you're like, yeah, that is the best thing. And then everybody goes to the table for it. And then the patients who really need it, like severe obesity, BMI greater than 40, or really severely uncontrolled type 2 diabetes, where they were able to really get their sugars under control using maybe a GLP-1 rather than insulin. Now they're having to do daily injections rather than a weekly injection because somebody's trying to get it to lose 10 pounds because they saw it on social media, rather than like someone who really needs it for medically necessary reasons. So that's just like something that I've really noticed. What have you seen, Morgan?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting too, because especially in backorder situations, and again, this was more so maybe before we had the weight loss obesity indication for these agents, it becomes an issue in backorders of like anything else in medicine, like triaging. You know, when we have limited resources, we have a limited amount to be able to give to patients. Who in that algorithm that we go down of, who is most indicated or who would benefit most from these medications would get it first. And so it became like an ethical question of like, okay, well, of course we want people's A1Cs and blood sugars to stay under control because we don't want them to go into DKA or, have a hospitalization from that. But then also obesity is a chronic condition in which it is approved now and people need those agents too. And so I think it's been an interesting thing to debate with other people. Especially even though we have the weight loss indications now, I've seen a couple of times in my practice where we'll have people on like an indicated Wegovy, Zepbound, or Saxenda, but then they're not able to get that. So they need to transition to another agent. And they're like, oh, well, why can't I go on Trulicity? And Trulicity doesn't have that weight loss indication. And so I see a couple times where I've had to have different conversations about like, well, that's not indicated. So first of all, insurance is probably not going to approve it. And that's a large barrier that we've seen now is the insurance companies have really caught up to the appropriate indications for the appropriate brand named products. And so a lot of times now it's really difficult for you to try to get a Trulicity for an obesity indication because that indication doesn't exist for that particular product. And so a lot of those prior authorizations have been put in place and the criteria for them are really strict to the point where it's almost counterproductive because now it's making it 10 times harder for the people who actually qualify for them to even get them, which is quite annoying. But for the most part, like I said recently, I feel like the shortages have evened out. For some odd reason, Trulicity 1.5 right now, particularly in my area, I don't know if that's a national thing. I think it is because I looked it up on ASHP. That has been a weird shortage. It's just like one dose. And so I think that's mostly too, it was interesting at the beginning of the year, Novo Nordisk announced that they were discontinuing Levemir insulin. So they completely stopped producing that, mostly because the demand and use and a lot of insurance formularies prefer Lantus or Basaglar. But then they also said that they were pulling back on Victoza Saxenda production specifically so that they could focus on Ozempic Wegovy production. And so obviously the manufacturers of these drugs know that there's a lack of supply, but an increase in demand. And so they're trying to kind of pivot their own manufacturing and production to kind of match that. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Farm So Hard Ambulatory Care Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a comment. Tell us your controversies that you have about GLP-1, some of your thoughts around all the stuff that goes on social media, the compounding of GLP-1s, all the good things that we talked about today. But don't forget to subscribe, rate, share, and review this podcast. And a new addition is we have a Patreon link in our website. If you would like to help support the podcast, support us and all the future things that we're going to be doing with the podcast, we hope you do so. But until then, we'll see you next time.
So I farm so hard, the employees want to find me and then want to hire me. What's 100K to a guy like me? Could you please remind me? Farm so hard, this ain't easy. Working late nights, you best believe me. My grades can only go A's. Never want to see another B unless I'm Jay-Z. Farm so hard, let's get paid.